Which brings up the nitrogen cycle. If you're not familiar with the nitrogen cycle, you should be. It's amazing. When I took soil microbiology in college, we spent 5 days on this. I have about 5 minutes. But basically what happens is what we talked about, nitrogen-fixing bacteria living in the soil on either in root nodules or cyanobacteria do it in some cases, but there are these symbiotic bacteria that make ammonia for their host. They fertilize their host. That host dies and decomposes, and these bacteria, and then when it decomposes, that ammonia goes out into the soil. It's positively charged. It can absorb, it can stick onto clays, or it can stick onto organic matter. But then when the nitrifying bacteria get to it, it turns into nitrate. It oxidizes to nitrate. This is negatively charged, and it doesn't stick in the soil. It doesn't stick in the soil. It can be washed out. That's why it's the nitrate that is very prone to getting leached into groundwater, and it's a very common pollutant in groundwater. The way that we keep that from happening is basically to have a really active biological ecosystem and a really diverse ecosystem in your soil, so that things are always gonna live and die, but you want a lot of that to be happening right by the roots so that the plants take up that nitrate as soon as it becomes available. Trying to think of how to be more clear about this. If you add a lot of ammonia fertilizer rather than just having compost in your soil and a really lively living soil, all of that nitrate can live in the bacteria bodies, and it stays there when it's part of the bacteria bodies, when it's part of the bacteria biomass. If you add chemical nitrogen, if you just add Miracle-Gro to your soil, it's much more prone to not being taken up by the bacteria bodies and by the biomass, and it's much more prone to washing out and washing into the groundwater. Okay, let's talk about fungi. They're composed of chains of single cells called hyphae, and they can be grouped into 3 types: the decomposers, the mycorrhiza, and the pathogens and the parasites. I want to talk really briefly about the mycorrhiza. Mycorrhiza are fungi that infect a host plant's roots. And the plant, in return for sometimes getting some mineral nutrients out of the soil that the mycorrhiza are really good at getting, or water out of the soil that the mycorrhiza are really good at getting, the plant gives the mycorrhizal fungi photosynthate. It gives it sugar. There are a lot of conflicting sources of information out there about mycorrhiza and mycorrhiza in your garden. I have to kind of equivocate about mycorrhiza. There are some, at UC Davis, I had a lot of professors who would say that it's totally snake oil. Don't buy mycorrhizal inoculants for your plants. But I also have heard from other gardeners that they've had really good results. A lot of times I get questions about mycorrhiza, that's why I'm talking about it. The important thing to understand about a mycorrhizal relationship is that if the plant doesn't need more sugar, or if the plant doesn't need more nutrients from the soil, it's still going to give the mycorrhizal fungus sugar, and so that's kind of a drain on the plant. Really, the relationship between the plant and the fungus is it can be a spectrum between being very mutualistic, like them helping each other, to it being kind of like the fungus as a parasite on the plant. It's not a really clear cut. It's not very clear cut what the relationship has to be. So, sort of putting all this stuff together, we talked about pores and solids. We talked about the gas, the liquid, the mineral, and the organic fraction of soil. And all of those things work together to make soil structure. And improving soil structure is really kind of the key to improving your soil as a medium for plant growth. So organic matter feeds the bacteria and other microorganisms on the surface. Organic matter, it gives it that lovely dark color, and it gives it a friable texture, and that's what you want in your garden beds. And then, the bacteria at the surface, they excrete carbon dioxide, which dissolves in the soil water and makes carbonic acid that weathers the parent material. That then makes the minerals in the parent material available for plants. And then as time goes by, as 10,000 years goes by, those weathered minerals move down and reform as clays lower in profile, and that's how you get really interesting and amazing soil structure forming. I can guarantee you guys that if you all, went home and dug in the dirt, unless your soil is actually fill, you will find you can actually see structure forming in your soil. You can see the increase in clays. You can see some of the sort of structural forms we see with clays. Anyway, trailing off. So what can I do with my soil? So the best things to do to improve your soil, this is kind of a no-brainer. Add more compost. It's a balanced diet for the microbes, and having more life in your soil will make your soil better for plant growth. It's all of the slime and stuff that bacteria excrete that kind of turns into humus. And that will give you better soil structure. You can add other forms of organic matter, but you have to make sure that they have an appropriate carbon to nitrogen ratio. If you add stuff that has too much nitrogen, you're going to get that mineralization and stuff washing out of the profile. Or nitrification and stuff will wash out of the profile. If you add too much carbon, it actually it feeds the microorganisms a little too much. And so when people talk about immobilization of nitrogen, or nitrogen being not available if you add too much organic matter, basically what happens is if you feed the bacteria too much carbon, their populations explode. And all of those little bacteria, they need nitrogen in order to make the proteins to build their bodies. And so they're going to take nitrogen from the soil to build their bodies and take it away from your plants. Nitrogen's still there, it's not washing out, it's just that those bacteria have to eat up all the carbon, and their population has to start going down before any nitrogen is going to become available to your plants. The other thing is till at the correct moisture content, which is about 5 minutes in my soil. If you till when the soil is too wet, you will destroy soil structure that has taken thousands of years to form. So all of this structure, if you till deeply at too wet of a soil content, all this structure, all the pores and the blocks and the prisms and these interesting structural forms that have taken shape in your soil, if you till when it's too wet, they will be smashed flat and you will lose all your pore spaces, and the roots really grow through the pores and not through the solids of soil. So till when your soil is crumbly, not when it's squishy. Till at the correct moisture content. And in Livermore, it's really hard because the soil is very clayey, and so it goes from like I said, it goes from squishy to concrete in about 5 minutes. And it's always like, you know, the second week of April. And then last but not least, add some more compost. Like, remember that compost is always oxidizing off. We live in a place where the bacteria are really active. They want to eat up all the compost. They constantly eat up all the compost. Our soils sort of come to equilibrium about 1 to 2% organic matter, and you want your soil in your garden to be 5% organic matter. So you have to constantly add more compost. So that's that. Any questions? Shoot. Here's it.
I just had a comment that I think that as master gardeners, we keep hearing about people. I keep reading blogs where people go, I just made a load of compost, now I have soil for my plants. And we have this real, people don't understand soil. People have been conditioned to build raised beds to escape their soil because their soil is clay, instead of utilizing their soil.
Well, it's an interesting point. I don't have any more slide, do I? No. So the soil here in Livermore Valley is clay loam for the most part. And actually, there are true clay soils in Alameda County. My parents are actually on a vertisol in Albany, and that is a pure clay soil. But really, if you're any place on this textural triangle, I gotta go back to it. If you're any place kind of in this neighborhood on the textural triangle, which I guarantee you are, you have a decent agronomic soil. You can work with your soil. It's a pretty good soil. People always think that their soils are worse than they are. And you can improve it to the point where it will grow things really well.
Yeah, and then Alameda also has sand.
So yeah, Alameda's over here. This is no good. Yeah. But even sand will be improved by adding compost.
So the question is, with compost, do you add it if you're trying to maintain, in other words, you have a garden that's planted or whatever, should you be tilling it into the soil, or should you be applying it to the top and letting it kind of work its way in? So in other words, if tilling destroys the structure, should you be tilling?
I think adding on top works really well. The exception, especially for ornamental gardens, just add on top.
I mean, if you're replanting the garden every year, I understand. Possibly,
and having a little bit of mineral soil mixed into the compost in a vegetable garden really helps with the seed bed. Compost is so friable that it doesn't hold moisture well enough to germinate seeds well. Yeah. So.
And from that point, I mean, if you're putting it on top, should you be putting it on? I mean, you should be putting it on yearly or more frequently than that. Okay.
Yearly. I mean, you can tell, like, if you have a pot that has organic potting soil in it, and you keep it moist all the time, how much does the soil go down in a year? About that much. That's all from oxidation from the bugs eating the soil. It's not washing out the bottom, it's getting oxidized off because the bugs are eating it. So, you know, just the way I think about it, and I haven't measured this in a lab, but if my soil is going to oxidize off this much in a pot in a year, I'm going to add that much compost on everywhere.
Okay.
So, any other questions?
How about the bad soil that has the mycorrhiza in it? Is that a marketing thing? Does it really?
That was the thing that I was kind of equivocating on. It probably doesn't hurt.
Yeah.
I buy the cheapest potting soil I can get my hands on.
I mean, is it really worth the?
Probably not. I mean, if you're talking about the Fox Farm stuff that has all the fancy stuff in it, I don't buy the stuff. But maybe it's better. I don't know. Yeah.
I was just going to say that two classes of vegetables, if we're talking about growing food, quinopods and brassica.
Yeah.
Brassicas don't have a symbiotic relationship.
Which is a really interesting point. So quinopods and brassicas don't form mycorrhizal associations. And the reason for that ecologically is they're very rooty species, and so their sort of ecological niche is to colonize soil that's brand new sediment. They're the pioneers, and they go out and they colonize right where the glaciers were retreating, or right where the flood has just swept through and wiped everything clean. And there isn't already a reservoir of fungi in the soil to infect them. Yeah.
I have cleaned off my summer beds, and this whole section stays in the shade all winter.
Mm-hmm.
It has dropped because of the oxidation, as you explained. I'm gonna plant some vetch in there. Should I throw in the vetch first, and then in the spring add some compost, or should I do it the other way around?
I would add compost in the spring, because that vetch is not, so it's, once again, the reason that the vetch is adding, the way that the vetch adds nitrogen to the soil is that it forms this mycorrhizal, an association with a bacterium. And that relationship can be a spectrum from mutualist, or mutually beneficial relationship to like